Hello, my loves. Hello, hello, hello. Before we get into this episode, I've got a bit of a rant here, but it all actually ties into the astrology. So this is going to be a little amusing. It is Easter morning. I have recorded this episode multiple times. Like, this is the umpteenth time. I can't even explain it. And I said in previous episodes, this week is in the week that we are coming out of, the week before Easter. Mercury was going into shadow. The software, the programming, whatever you want to call it, that I use, the website for this podcast recording, integrated like a chat GPT thing, and it's using it for transcription basis, which is great. However, whenever I have recorded over the last few days since this whole integration thing, my screen looks normal. Everything looks like it's going to plan. And I will share the chart onto the screen for the YouTube visual watchers of this podcast. Now, everything looks normal to me while I'm recording, but when I get to the end and I see the final product, for whatever reason, the screen share has not been processing. It has not been coming over and integrating into the episodes. So I keep redoing them. But now it's Easter morning. And I'm doing this episode again. And I want to just kind of say, one, the fact that this all happened since Mercury has went into shadow tells me that part of this upcoming Mercury retrograde is going to be software issues. Super fun for me. And it also kind of goes into like some of the astrology of last week. Remember some of the topics, some of the conversations, some of the things that are going on from last week. We're going to come back to them in one way, shape, or form. For me, apparently, it's going to be software issues, so that's fun. I'll take software issues over other possibilities because the last Mercury retrograde landed my car in the shop multiple times in a 6-week span. So I'll take software issues. It's cheaper to deal with. I'm venting. It ties into the astrology. I'm finding the humor in it, but at the same time, I'm just like, okay. So no matter what, I'm uploading this video. No matter what, I'm uploading this video. So later on, if you see the full version and you see a chart, that means something decided to work properly. However, if you don't see a chart, I'm going to do my best to be as clear as regards to like the placements and the exact times of certain transits. But remember, there's a human effect whenever it comes to the times of transits. And that is, if you have, humor me, a full moon in your 10th house of career, but you're on vacation for a week, there's a chance that energy doesn't play out until you get back to work. Just an example. We did have a full moon last week, and that would have only applied to Capricorn risings, but that was just a good example that I had. Some transits, whenever they come through, are very different than others, and they don't always come through at the exact time. And that is truly the human effect. I always say whenever I do individual readings for people, especially if I give them dates, add 2 or 3 days forward or backwards for the human effect. I'm giving you the exact minute based off of the transit itself. But I have seen multiple times in the past when a transit is the other direction, like it's a day or two earlier, or it's a day after it was supposed to be. Don't be surprised by that. I'm just letting you know up front. I'm already seeing how some of this is going to go later, which is not fun. So I guess this is going to be fun. I'm going to try to get ahead of it this week, but it's a Mercury retrograde. You can always get ahead of things. We can try, but we don't always get that chance. And that kind of goes into where we're at. I'm sorry, that was a very long rant, but it does kind of tie into the astrology, like I said. And later this week, I'm going to do just a Mercury retrograde video. That was already in the plans, just to be clear, but I will. And I wanted to do that after Mercury went into shadow because you can tell people 500 times, you're going to get a clue, you're going to get an idea, you'll have some kind of communication about how something's going to go later. And they won't remember it in the moment of when things are occurring. They won't pick up on the little synchronicities. They think back and everything's hindsight's 2020. Very few people have the ability to pick up on the energies as they're happening. So I want to do the Mercury retrograde video after after things have gone into shadows, so that way I can put more emphasis onto what occurred this week. What's the issue? What decisions have been made? What was communicated? What technology things have went through? Who's your mind been thinking about? Mercury made that conjunction to the North Node this last week. And that was going on during the full moon in Libra. What was going on? What were we thinking about in the last week? What decisions have been made? Because remember, we're going to come back to those. Now, are we coming back to them this week? No. This week, we're kind of closing something out and starting to transition into something else. And usually in the week following a full moon, the energy starts to wind down. But this doesn't feel like wind down energy. It's kind of a limbo. For some people, there's one area winding down. For other people, there's something else that's kind of building up or sliding into place or starting to come together or starting to be revealed, or you're starting to figure it out. And we're falling into that this week. There's going to be a lot of logical or social interactive energy this week. But then we're going to cap this week off with a lot of emotions and some real deep things that are going to start to bubble, and it is bubble, to the surface. So let's talk about Monday. Oh, Monday. Share my screen. It says that it's sharing, by the way. Just to be clear, I hope it's sharing. All right. Monday morning, April 10th. I have this at 6:29 a.m. Central Time. If you're Eastern, add an hour. If you're Western, start subtracting. You know what to do. We have the moon in Sagittarius. And throughout the day, the moon is going to trine Chiron at 16 degrees of Aries. Then into the evening, so the Chiron trine is going to happen around 1 o'clock-ish my time. Later in the evening, so literally between 7 and 11 p.m., the moon is going to be in Jupiter's sign, in the sign of Sagittarius, making a trine to the sun and Jupiter before they start their conjunction. I'm going to actually cover this one last. I'll come back to it. The other thing that's going on today is we have Venus at 29 degrees of Taurus. So with Venus at 29 degrees of Taurus, there's something that we're ending. This is her last day in Taurus. So there's something that we're ending, something that we're wrapping up, something that we're closing out, but this is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. There's no heavy impact. There's no squares coming from Aquarius or Leo. There's no opposition coming from Scorpio. There's not even trines or sextiles. It's just Venus about to change signs. So again, for a lot of people, this is going to be wrapping something up, putting the final coat of paint on, getting the last thing sewn together, getting the last thing nailed together, getting the last thing just kind of wrapped, that last present wrap, that last Easter egg hidden. I know it's after Easter, but it's a good example. And then it's just kind of transitioning to the next thing. It's not heavy. There's something about Monday with that final degree of Venus in Taurus, and then going into when she transitions into Gemini on Tuesday, there's something about that energy that is just kind of wrapping something up either on Monday or Tuesday. Again, not a heavy wrap up, not a horrible thing, but there's something to be wrapped up here. Now, with the moon going into Sagittarius right now, as it is, hopeful, boastful, happy, that's all very Sag things, making a trine to Chiron. So again, that's going to happen roughly about 1 o'clock my time, so just after lunch. If it's Eastern, you're going to go up an hour. If you're Western, you're subtracting. Y'all know how this goes. But for a lot of people, this is like a wellness check. Chiron is that wounded healer. It is that, area in regards to trauma, area in regards to unhealed wounds, area that actually just covers healed. And for a lot of people, this is kind of a wellness check. This is the moon making a supportive connection to Chiron. Hey, I know you had surgery. I'm just kind of checking in to see how everything's going. Hey, I know that you've been super busy. How's business going? Hey, I've been super busy and I haven't been able to be a good friend to you right now. Just wanted to say, hey, and I miss you. How's everything going? There's something very supportive in this energy. So for a lot of people, this is just like getting the check in, getting the check up, the wellness check from a friend, checking on a friend, checking the progress of how something is coming together. We just had that Sun Chiron conjunction last week, which made us like take a look at an area that needed healing, take a look at an area that needed our attention, or exposing some area of wound or trauma or healing. That was a big part of the energy that was going on literally during the full moon in Libra. That was going on that day too. Now the moon is making a trine to Chiron, and it feels like a wellness check for a lot of people. That's the best way to describe it. As we get deeper into the evening, the moon, again in Jupiter's sign, is going to make a trine to both the sun and to Jupiter. So we're looking at something that is coming together. It's not exact on this day, so we're not going to talk about the exact part yet. That happens Tuesday. But then there is this supportive energy kind of pushing something together, or pushing somebody to look at something, pushing somebody to go somewhere. There's kind of a supportive push or pull. Hey, we're going to do this thing. You should totally come over for lunch tomorrow. We're going to do this networking thing. We're going to do the big stuff. We're going to do something like this. We're going to do something like this. You should come over. We're going to do this. I'm coming over. There's something here that's kind of like aiding the energy that needs to be seen, that needs to come together. And that starts in the later part of Monday night going into Tuesday. Now, let's talk about Tuesday. We're going to bump this by a day, not an hour. I'm trying to be as clear as I can. We start the morning real early. The moon is going to make a square to Neptune while the sun and Jupiter are starting their conjunction. The other transit we have going on today is we have this trine between Venus and Pluto. I'm going to start with the moon and Neptune. The moon is in Jupiter's sign. Neptune's in Jupiter's sign. There's something imaginative in this energy. There's something that's like a temporary challenge, something unexpected, something that we're a little confused on that we have to work through in part of the day. Or we have to explain, we have to make clear, because there's some area that is shrouded, cloudy, foggy, confusing, confusable, whatever works out. In other ways, there's going to be like questions in regards to somebody's actions. They've said one thing, they didn't do that thing, and you're starting to see that. And that kind of feeds into what's going to happen later in the day when the sun and Jupiter's conjunction actually goes exact. We start the early morning with the moon squaring Neptune. Now, for some people, this is happening at 6:29 a.m. Central Time. So between that 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. mark. For some people, it's just going to be like waking up, trying to drink your coffee, and there's not enough coffee. And you're kind of in a cloud and like, oh, what day is it again? I hate those days too. I was like, I did that part of last week. It's like, what day is it? Because I feel like that full moon day like totally threw me off. Other parts of it is just like, again, 2 and 2 plus 4. We're seeing something that doesn't make sense, and it hits those little flags. It hits those little areas that we need to check into, that we need to follow up on, that we need to get clear on, that we need to overcome in some way. We need to put something together and figure out what is there. Now, there's something that is not clear with the moon square Neptune. Put a pin in that mark. We're going to come back to it. The other transit we have going on today is Pluto, the planet of fear and trauma and death and reincarnation and transformation and power struggles and power abuse, healing, and how taking some of that energy of trauma and abuse and negative and how it can be transmuted or transformed into something else. Pluto is at 0 degrees of Aquarius. He's slowing down. He's getting ready to go retrograde in about a month. Like literally whenever we're in eclipse season, Pluto will go retrograde. Venus is now in Gemini at 0 degrees. So she goes into a new sign and immediately hits that trine from Pluto. And there's 2 different elements in this energy right here. One, Venus is now in Gemini, and she is started an energy known as mutual reception. And this is going to be really good for us with this upcoming Mercury retrograde later on. So just everybody be aware of that. But by entering mutual reception, what we have is Venus, 0 degrees of Gemini. But we also have Mercury right here in Venus's sign. So we have a house swap. Venus is working on behalf of Mercury. Mercury's working on behalf of Venus. Anything that impacts Venus impacts Mercury. Anything that impacts Mercury affects Venus. They are working hand in hand with one another. That's important because that means that there is something about Pluto that needs to be voiced. But it needs to be voiced or understood, communicated in a positive light because this is Venus's energy. Now, the last time Venus and Pluto made a connection was back in March. For some people, this is going to tie back to that timeline. And the reason is because what happened was Pluto was at 29 degrees of Capricorn, Venus was at 29 degrees of Aries, and there was somebody got a message, somebody opened their phone, they saw a tweet, they saw something on Facebook, they got an email. There was something that came through that was not expected, but we had so much other things going on because this Venus-Pluto square occurred during the Mars square Neptune, Sun, Mercury Cazimi squaring Mars shit show that happened the week of St. Patrick's Day. So that week was back. But all those transits were exact more like the 12th to the 18th. So whenever we were in that week, so to speak, that is roughly a week's timeline. When we were in that week, we had something else come through and we were so busy trying to get motivated, trying to get clear, trying to get something worked through that when we got the message, I'm just going to use that mundane example, we're looking at our phone and we're reading it, and we're trying to absorb, and we're trying to process, but we can't process. So most of us didn't even respond. And we put it away because there was this whole mess of other things going on. Back burner it is. Out of sight, out of mind. Something that occurred around that time can start to come back around. Now, that's not the only way to look at this, but I want to make people aware of that. The other thing I'm looking at in this regard is that there is a lot of boisterousness whenever it comes to things being in air signs. We are talking about Pluto in an air sign, a fixed air sign. So we want to talk about things that are more fixed. We're talking about fixed trauma. And I'm not talking about like we're fixing our trauma. I'm not talking about that. I'm saying more along the lines of like the things that we are mentally fixated on. We've had trauma in the past. We've had areas that require healing. We've had something that we are working through and trying to transform. The more positive light of this. Transforming a garden, transforming something ourselves, transforming our home, trying to change something in the career aspect. We've had something that we've been in the process of shifting. If it hasn't been that transformation of energy, if it hasn't been that changeable, trying to get something fixed and built in a certain way, then it's been the other side. And it's been more along the lines of like we've had this heaviness in our mind, a missed opportunity, a past abuse that keeps coming through, a past trauma that keeps coming back up, like little things keep getting triggered. And when Venus enters that trine to Pluto, it's like seeing the trauma, seeing the fear, seeing the transformation, seeing the change and the benefit from it. If we heal this area, we start working through it, we start talking out part of our process, it's going to allow for healing. And that starts to come through after the Pluto-Venus trine, something that can be very hidden. The thing about trauma is we don't necessarily always talk about it. The thing about abuse is we don't necessarily always talk about it. Even on our transformations, we don't always like to talk about it, depending on the level of transformation and trauma and everything that we're talking about. I know that sounded redundant. I apologize. But still. So there is something deep within something that we desire, something that we want, Venus energy with the word desire, that we want to voice, that we want to talk about, that we want to come through, that we want to occur in some way. And with Venus now in Gemini, we have the ability to voice that in some way. So something hidden, positive or negative, it depends on your own chart and your own karma. Something not clearly understood with the Venus-Neptune square, Moon-Neptune square. So we've got two parts, the Venus-Pluto and the Moon-Neptune. Now let's talk about the other side. And this is the bigger transit of all of them. I'm going to spend more time on it, but it's those other two transits that lead me into how I see this one. Now, the Moon is in Jupiter's sign, Neptune's in Jupiter's sign. But by the time we get to the evening, and now I am going to bump this by hour, I'm really, really hoping that the screen does what it's supposed to do later on. So we're going to bump this by hour and we get to, yeah, that looks good. So this is roughly 6:29 p.m. I think this conjunction actually happens closer to like 5:30 Central Time. But as we get later into the evening and the Sun-Jupiter's conjunction perfects and becomes more exact to the exact degree that it is, which will actually be 21 degrees and 46 minutes. At that same time, the Moon will leave Jupiter's sign and go into Saturn's sign. Where is Saturn? In Jupiter's sign. 2 + 2 is 4, babies. Hear me out. The Moon is going to enter a sextile to Saturn. So we have the Moon in Saturn's sign. So being hosted by Saturn. Saturn is being hosted by Jupiter. And Jupiter is having a conjunction with the Sun in Aries. Now, in ancient astrology, the days that the Sun and Jupiter come together are supposed to be the luckiest day of the year. And for some people, it will feel that way. It will feel like something just kind of fell into place. Something finally came together. Something finally made sense. 2 + 2 is 4. But there is another aspect. And I look at those other transits that have been going on, the way the day started with the Moon square to Neptune. And then we still have Venus in a trine to Pluto. What this tells me for a lot more people is not that something's coming together, not so much that something's falling into place, but it's something that is being revealed. The Sun is our ego, but the Sun is light. We need light. The Sun coming into a conjunction with Jupiter shows me we're shedding light on something. Now, Jupiter is now in the final decan of Aries. So we're in our last 45 days-ish, I'm rounding that out, of Jupiter in Aries. But that doesn't take anything away. It just means that whatever we're starting to go through over these next 45 days is really lining the things out that we've been working on, dealing with, working through since May of last year. May 11th, last year, first eclipse season, the first eclipse season in this Taurus-Scorpio axis, that's when Jupiter went into Aries. Jupiter went to 8 degrees, turned retrograde, went back, spent 2 months back in Pisces. Actually, Jupiter's retrograde back into Pisces took place during the majority of the Mars retrograde, which I thought was amusing for so many different reasons. But then Jupiter, right before Christmas, went back into Aries. And a certain energy started to finally launch and push forward and start going. And there's something that we've been slowly trekking towards, working on, working through. And a lot of us working through very independently because Jupiter is in Aries. And Aries is a lot about independence and doing something on your own for yourself. This is an action-oriented sign. So we've taken certain actions towards hope, towards prosperity, towards something being very, very solid. For a lot of us, it's spiritual growth and spiritual changes, because that's another thing that Jupiter reflects. And now as the Sun is coming into a conjunction to Jupiter, there's something about what we've been dealing with and what we've been working on since the first eclipse season. So since last May, that we're finally wrapping up. And I feel like the wrap up starts with the Sun-Jupiter conjunction and of course goes through the rest of eclipse season. So We are looking at something coming to light, seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, seeing something finally come together, seeing the transformation and understanding the benefit of it. Venus, Pluto, Sun, Jupiter, seeing how we've transformed something, how we've overcome something, how we've been dealing with something, and how we can now talk about it in a way that we haven't done. Again, Venus, Pluto. Now, with the moon and this sextile to Saturn, it adds another little layer. The moon is our emotions. The moon in Capricorn is technically in its fall, but I also look at it in the sense of like we make very logical decisions. We get a lot more grounded in our emotions when the moon is in earth signs. I actually enjoy the moon in Capricorn. I really do. This moon making a sextile to Saturn, while the Sun Jupiter conjunction is exact, is it's time for something emotionally. It's time for something to shift. It's time for depth, deep things, because Pisces is the ocean whenever it comes to emotions. And I'll get to that here in a little while. But this area of depth, deep, hidden things, it's time for those things to come to light. When I've meditated on this transit, when I've seen this transit, that is what I'm seeing. For some people, yes, this is two things finally coming together and finally lining out in a lot of great ways. But for others, this is the light being shed on something. We are having something revealed to us. We are having something come to the surface. We are having something understood. We are seeing the reward in this energy. More often than not, it's going to be the actions that we have been working through and planning and now nurturing, because Mars, the host of this conjunction, Mars rules Aries. The Sun-Jupiter conjunction is happening in Aries, whereas Mars in Cancer. There is an energy that we have been nurturing, and now we're going to finally see the benefit. We're going to show the benefit. We're going to shed light in some area, in some way. That's a lot of this energy. This is supposed to be the luckiest day of the year. And it really comes down to, again, your own personal karma and your own personal chart, where this is falling into place. For a lot of people, this is a really good energy. For some people, it's revealing things that we don't necessarily want to deal with. They're not necessarily things that we want to like jump into, but sometimes we don't get a choice. So for a lot of us, this is going to be a good energy. For some of us, it's going to hit harder than others. So be aware of that. Now, we're going to get into Wednesday. The moon will still be in Capricorn. I'm bumping this by hour just because I like to start these in the morning. All right, we are at 6:29 a.m. Central Time. This is April 12th. The moon is still in Capricorn, and in the overnight hours, going into the early morning, the moon will make an opposition to Mars. Now, this actually happens closer to the 4 a.m. mark my time. And for people that are, again, overnight workers, that means that there can just be some frustration. There can be some things that kind of pop up. There can be irritability of people like not taking certain actions or not doing things the right way. The moon is in Capricorn. And by not doing them the right way, we have disruption. And for some of us, we'll kind of wake up in that mood. Like something wasn't quite right. We didn't quite sleep right. Something's bugging us. We can feel it in our spine, feel it in our shoulder blades, crook in the neck kind of thing. Or, it doesn't always have to be negative. Some of us are going to wake up this morning and we're going to be heavily motivated. We're going to want to get something accomplished. We're trying to get something done. We're trying to get something moving. And as we get our day going, we'll kind of get over the grumpiness and we'll finally get a lot of things kind of lined out. Now, there's another energy that goes into the lining out here. And that is after the moon makes its opposition to Mars, it's going to go into trines. The first one is going to be with Mercury. So we have the moon right here. It'll trine Mercury. And then later into the evening, the moon will trine Uranus. There's something about putting something together in a solid way. When the moon trines Mercury, earth to earth, the way that it is, it feels like putting a plan together getting things in line, getting things in order so that way we can do something in the future. Considering right afterwards, the moon is going to trine Uranus. It's something we're excited about, something kind of unexpected. Some people are just going to be surprised, like, yeah, surprise party. Other people, the surprise is an intervention. Yay, intervention. I'm sorry, I shouldn't make fun of interventions, but at the same time, it's kind of in that energy. Like, there's something that we're working through. We're trying to get logistically planned, that we're trying to get worked and taken care of. We're getting our car in order. We're arguing with software engineers, just mentally preparing myself for that now. We're trying to get things in order. And then later in the evening, whenever the moon hits that trine to Uranus, it's like, yes, the software is fixed. Yes, I got my car back. Yes, everything's working out. Yes, I'm going. Like, tickets are confirmed, whatever we're doing, but there's something very solid that we're working on throughout the day of the 12th. Now, the 13th is going to be really interesting, so I want to say something before we go into that. And that is, whatever you're planning, be flexible on your plans. Plain and simple, I got to be really clear about that. Be flexible in your plans, yet still make them. And I don't want to say just make a plan, but make the task list. So by Wednesday, if you don't have your task list of what you're trying to do the next day lined out, you might regret it. Really, you might regret it, because there's going to be like mental lulls as we get into the day. So I want to say this before we get into the next day. Anything that you need worked out before we get into Thursday, like literally lay that stuff out the night before. Anything that you're trying to take with you to work so you don't forget it, put it in the car the night before. Put it in the Jeep the night before. Confirm your appointments yourself, just to be clear, because something's going to happen the next day that it's going to feel a little foggy in a lot of ways. So let's get into that. Let's see. So what's interesting is we have on the 13th, this is April 13th, 6:29 a.m. Central Time, just because I bumped it by a day. The moon is going to make a sextile to Neptune. Considering Saturn is now in Pisces, there's kind of a fogginess and a cloudiness as that transit hits. Because the other thing that is really interesting to me is right after the moon ends its sextile to Neptune, it's going to go void. And if you know anything about the moon, when the moon goes void, we don't have the ability always to get something started. We might think about it, but we've got like no gas. There's no motivation. There's not enough 5-hour energy. There's not enough Monster. There's not enough coffee, not enough caffeine. You're just like, man, I'll do it later. I don't want to do it right now. We just don't have that motivation going. If you already have the plan, if you already have things lined out, if you already have things put in front of you, then finishing a task can be done. Starting a new task is harder. So this is why I'm saying probably line your stuff up, have your stuff put together the day before, because the next morning we're going to literally be at the coffee pot going, I thought you were going to give me energy. I thought you were going to make this better. And it's not going to be until later in the evening that we're really going to pick up a lot more. So there's going to be a bit of like a haze and a fogginess through most of the day on Thursday. It's kind of like waiting for something to click, and the click is going to happen later in the day. So let's take a look at that. Not by a minute, not an hour. Okay, so between 4 and 5 o'clock, it's going to be closer to 4 o'clock, the moon is going to go into Aquarius and immediately make a conjunction to Pluto. You go to the store, you turn a corner, boom, there's somebody you're not talking about. You're going somewhere just kind of on autopilot, and then you're at the intersection, you look at the car next to you, and you're like, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting that. Because your focus is somewhere else, but once the moon goes into the new sign, it's immediately met with something. And for some people, this is going to be running head on into fear, into trauma, into the past. And it's very, very triggering considering how the rest of this weekend is going to go. Be aware of that. I'm warning you now. There can be something very triggering whenever the moon hits its conjunction of Pluto. But on the flip side, if you're going somewhere, you get to that place and you walk in the door and you're seeing somebody you haven't seen in a long time, what the moon's conjunction of Pluto is like, I haven't seen you in so long. You look so incredible. Oh my God, you've lost weight. You built muscle. I love the hair color. I love your toes. I'm a toe person. Like I have to get pedicures. That's why I said that. Pisces moon, it happens. This is that kind of energy though. It's either running into somebody unexpected and immediately feeling the triggers of trauma or fear or something that we don't want to deal with because of that negative impact of Pluto. But there is that other side, and it can just be like running into somebody and it's a surprise, and you just see how they've blossomed and how they've changed and how they've grown, how their family has grown. Like if you see somebody from, like, I did this literally last night. I seen somebody that I worked with like over a decade ago, and and you have that little quick moment of reminiscence, and you see how they've changed. They're seeing how you've changed. You see that they're in a similar job. They see that you're different. Like you see all those different things, and you have to take in that moment of transformation. This is kind of that. You're either going somewhere knowing that you're going to have to face something that you fear head on, or you're going somewhere and as you're turning the corner, it's almost like a trigger with the moon's conjunction of Pluto. Now, it doesn't have to be negative. And for a lot of ways, it doesn't feel negative because as the evening progresses, the moon is going to go into her own trine with Venus. So it's running into somebody, having to deal with something, good or bad, whatever, and then kind of talking it through, letting the intellect come through, having those hard conversations. We're still in that Sun-Jupiter conjunction that had just occurred. So talking about certain revelations, talking about what you're doing in the future. There's something that leads to benefit because later in the evening, that moon trine to Venus, we overcome that fear. We overcome it in some way. We overcome the trigger. We start to laugh about it. Venus is in Gemini. We're going to be laughing. There's going to be an influx of sarcasm. I promise you. All right. And that goes all the way into Thursday. Now, the other thing about Venus's trine with the moon, and technically the moon is trining Venus, is that also coincides with Venus entering her square from Saturn. Now, this is not exact until Friday, but part of this overcoming energy with the moon and Pluto entering that, and then the moon entering that trine of Venus can also be part of, again, the emotional stuff that we're going to start to deal with deeper into the weekend. The first half of the weekend is going to have a lot more communication, a lot more spoken word, written word, a lot of announcements. There's going to be a lot of activity moving around. Very social energy when you have the moon in Aquarius. Very social energy when you have anything in Gemini. And there's a social awareness with Pluto in Aquarius. Now, I also want to emphasize again, Venus and Mercury are mutual reception. So anything that goes through Venus immediately is affecting Mercury. So anything, whether it's the Pluto trine to Venus or the moon trine to Venus right here, or the upcoming square to Venus, all of the things have an impact on Mercury and everything that Mercury is thinking about. So I want to talk about this on Thursday evening right now, before we get into the weekend. And that is the Mercury. The Mercury. Mercury is only at 12 degrees and 55 minutes. And on a normal trek, on a normal day, Mercury can go a full degree in less than 24 hours. What you're going to see is as this weekend continues, Mercury is starting to slow down. Now, I want people to be aware of this because that means that part of this weekend starts to shift our mindset and makes us start to slow down on some of the things that we're thinking about. So I want to also emphasize that some of the things that we're communicating, some of the things that we're talking about, some of the things that we're working through, they're going to have another effect. And they're going to start to shift the mindsets of a lot of people, especially when we get into very specific topics, very specific situations. So just understand, this is kind of the start of a big heart-opening energy for a while. And just know that if you are the steadfast person that every day you have to put your nose to the grind and work and work and work and work and work, you're going to get real salty this weekend. This is not the overwork weekend. This is the mental break weekend. From Thursday going into Friday and then most of Saturday, there's a lot of mental, social energy, a lot of activity, a lot of energy, and not everybody is going to do well with work. If you are working this weekend, there's always the risk of things being shorthanded. If you're trying to work and you do things all by yourself, what's going to happen is you're going to find that you're going to mess things up. You're going to stumble over your own work somehow, and you'll start to get very short-tempered with yourself. And that will kind of put you into it can put us into a harsh or negative mental energy in the later part of the weekend. This is not the weekend to be nose to the grind. Saturn ruled individuals, Saturn in the first individuals, Mars in the first individuals. This is not the nose to the grind weekend. There's a mental break that a lot of people need to have, and that mental break aids in the rethinking process. If you're trying to stay nose to the grind and you're not getting the information, you're not communicating the messages, you're not absorbing the thoughts of other people to the extent that it starts to do your mind shift, then you can take this to a more weighted area. And I do mean weight. Okay. Now let's get into Friday. Friday morning, the moon will still be in Aquarius. So I'm back at the 6:29 a.m. mark because I was apparently at 29 a.m. when I started all this. That's why. The moon is still in Aquarius. Like I said, the moon is going to go into a square with Mercury and Uranus throughout the day. And we have this square between Saturn and Venus that has been building. And it will go exact later in the evening on Friday. So I'm going to actually bump this all the way to the evening. We'll go to that. The Mercury moon square is going to be roughly around 2:30 my time. And then later is when the moon will square Uranus. This again goes into that social energy. And it's in between the moon squaring to Mercury and the moon square to Uranus that we have the exact square of Venus and Saturn. Now, Saturn is in the superior position. It is Saturn implying something onto Venus. Venus has an idea. Venus wants to do something. Venus is trying to get something moving forward. She's trying to get some progression. And for a lot of people, the weight of Saturn here is going to be actually Saturn implying their logic, their experience. The thing about Saturn in Pisces is there's so much depth to Pisces. Whenever it comes to the water signs, I'm going to stick to the two important ones for now. And these are the important ones because they're based off the transits this weekend, not discounting anybody. Okay. The moon is associated with Cancer. Cancer is the cardinal sign and it rules our emotions. But being a cardinal sign, it is reactive. So whenever it comes to Cancer and emotions, it's usually surface emotions. It's the way that we react to certain things intuitively, emotionally. That is that energy. Whenever it comes to Pisces, it's a whole different body of water. It's not the rain. It's not the storms that come through. It is the ocean. And we plunge into Pisces. And the thing about the depths of the ocean is we don't always know what's at the bottom. There's plenty of species in the bottom of the ocean Nobody knows what they're called. Nobody knows whether they exist yet. They haven't been discovered by man, so to speak, but they exist. We know that. So there are things that need to be understood. And it is the experience and the longevity of the Saturnian people, the Saturnian individual, whether that's an elder, whether that's an authority figure, whether that's a coach, somebody that just has more knowledge about something. There is something about implying onto the Venusian, onto the Venus person in this situation. That again goes into parts of the mindset shift of this weekend because Mercury is slowing down. So again, Venus there's a transit going on that is impacting Mercury. There's a Venus transit going on that is impacting Mercury. Not only that, the moon had that same square to Mercury. So the earlier part of the day, whenever the moon is squaring Mercury, I'll put that into perspective real quick. That's going to be like, what time do you get off work? Okay, I think I'm going to meet you here. We're going to have dinner at 7. Okay, where's dinner? And I'll just meet you at the restaurant. And it's going to be like trying to get logistics or trying to get something worked out. Not super heavy. There's somebody that has one frame of mind, then there's another, and we just got to work through that and overcome it. As we get later into the day, things get a lot more exciting whenever the moon hits its square to Uranus. During that same time, though, we have that other energy working out with the Saturn-Venus square. And that is the things that we're trying to put into order, the things that we're trying to get lined out, is because there is another impact at play. And there's another shift at play. If you're trying to work out your plans with a group of people, then we're not going to see the full impact and the full excitement and the full, surprise of what this is going to be like until later in the evening. If we're trying to get stuff done at work, we're getting the bad news that we're shorthanded. I'm going to warn you that right now. I worked in gas stations and I worked in restaurants whenever I was younger. And yeah, just trust me, it's going to be hectic if you're in that type of service industry. So parts of that are going to feed into this also. So you're going to see some of the things that were spoken one way that kind of come together in an unexpected way. We made the plan, we got everything lined out, and then things, of course, fall into play. But some people are going to be going into a more group setting, and they're going to be enjoying the communication of somebody else, the thoughts of somebody else, the experience of somebody else. For some of us, it's going to be like, I have a great idea and I want to talk about it with somebody. You go to that person that has more experience. You go to that elder. You go to your mom. I think it'd be really great if you went ahead and got me a new phone. I'm going to go with the most mundane example possible right now. Convince me you need a new phone. And if you don't do the convincing, you're not going to get it. Somebody has a want for something so they can move forward, and they're getting a whole different input of information, a whole different input of experience based off of Saturn. This isn't going to be the only play to this, but it is going to be a big part of the play deeper in the weekend. So Saturn-Venus square, we're going to have that energy building up through Wednesday, through Thursday, into Friday, but the after effect of the Saturn-Venus square, we're going to feel Saturday and Sunday. Just so you are aware. Want everybody on the same page on this one. There is something exciting. There can be some impulsiveness this weekend. There's things that a lot of people can be the chickens running around with their heads cut off, but that's because they're just enjoying the vibe and they're enjoying the energy. Some people are going to get really frustrated with the chickens with their head cut off because they're working. For those that are working, I'm sorry. Okay. So we're going to get into the 15th, and I'm bumping this by hour. I'm really hoping later that this comes through appropriately. So I'm going to get to right here. Yeah. So April 15th, this is 10:30 Central Time. I'm just going to round it out. The moon is in Aquarius. It'll be wrapping up its transit through Aquarius, and the last connection that it will make will be to the sextile of Jupiter and the Sun in Aries. Considering we're talking about the moon in Aquarius, this is a fixed earth sign. This is the the sign that represents people and masses, there is a lot of action going on with groups of people. There's a lot of things coming together within the camaraderie, within the communication, within the mindset, within the technology in some aspects. The things that are coming together and lining up kind of flow throughout the rest of the day. So this isn't like before, whenever the moon made that sextile to Neptune and then went void, because that kind of left the lingering of confusion from a few days ago. This one's a little bit different. The moon making a sextile to both Jupiter and the sun leaves us kind of going into a bit of hopefulness and just wanting to do things for ourselves, wanting to do something for the first time, wanting to do something new, wanting to do something exciting. We're making memories. For a lot of people, this energy is going to be like making memories, or it's going to be recollecting on memories. That can be a part of it too. Venus is exactly 1 degree away. So right now, again, it's 10:30 a.m. Central Time. Saturn is at 4 degrees and 9 minutes of Pisces, and Venus and Gemini is at 5 degrees and 9 minutes. So they're exactly 1 degree apart. So some parts of the day before are still in the lingering here. We're still like, oh yeah, I sat down with mom last night and we talked everything out and we got a really good plan together, and she enlightened me on some things on how I can make it better. I met with the greatest investor last night who's been able to like help grow businesses before. And I had a great conversation, and they really put some things in perspective for me. I really wanted a new phone and I got told no. And I'm trying to figure out another way to get a new phone. Do not break your phone to get a new phone. Just trust me on that. But we kind of go through this energy of like things kind of coming together, doing something social, doing something that's going to, have that mental effect. But this is where I was going into, we need that mental break for part of this evening before the shift in our mindset starts to affect us in another way. And the other way starts to really kick in for some people late evening on Saturday. For other people, it's going to be Sunday. So let's get to that. I have April 15th, so we're still on Saturday, and this is 6:29 p.m. Central Time. And the moon is just gone into Pisces. So literally between 5:45, closer to 6, is whenever the moon went into Pisces. So the moon goes into Pisces, and then as the evening continues, it will go into a conjunction to Saturn. Now, the first part of the evening, right around dinner time, whenever everybody is wrapping up part of the social element of the day, we get that like emotional gratification of the moon going into Pisces, like plunging into it, going, I'm so glad we got to do this weekend. I'm so glad we hung out. I'm so glad I met you. I'm so glad you came to town. I'm so glad we did this. We get some emotional gratification as we get to the moon going into Pisces. A lot of people are going to feel the emotional gratification. Others are going to feel like everything's going right for somebody else. Everything's going, and it's going to like trigger that more negative mental energy, which takes us into the plunging of the negative parts of our emotions. So this can go either way, again, depending on your chart and depending on what's being activated, your own personal karma, and the way that you process things mentally. I'm not reading natal charts right now, so that's why I'm saying it the way I'm saying it. But as we get into the later parts of the evening, we're home, we're having a late night drink, we're finishing off that bottle of wine, we're wrapping some things up, smoking a J, whatever you're doing, and the heart conversations, the deeper emotional conversations start to kind of bubble to the surface. Now, I'm saying the bubbling to the surface for a very specific reason. One, Mercury and Venus are in mutual reception. So there are things being spoken about that are very Venusian. The heart wants what the heart wants. We are speaking about certain desires, but we are also talking about the moon, our intuitions, our empathic self that has now plunged into the ocean. Anybody that has thrown something into water, that has jumped into water themselves, that has seen how water works, whenever you throw a rock, throw a brick, throw something into the water, and it plunges through, it hits the surface, but there is still that pocketing of air that has to come out from underneath said object, whether it's you or brick or rock or whatever. And those air bubbles are part of the splash effect that come to the surface. There are air bubbles that come up. We've had the splash. That was, I'm so glad I came. That was that emotional gratification. That's what that was. That was the splash. Now we're in that later part of the evening where things are a little bit more settled in, and we're reminiscent of how the day has gone in many ways, or we're overthinking the way the day has gone in many ways. And then as that moon makes a conjunction to Saturn, we start to feel an emotional weight. Now, for some people, this is going to be two people having a sit down and a long conversation at night. And if it has to do with Venus, maybe somebody snuck out. That's a real mundane way to look at it. Your daughter snuck out tonight. Oh, did she? Well, I got back in town just in time. Let me go take care of that. The moon's conjunction to Saturn is going to have two things coming together. So this can literally be mom and dad having a conversation about Venus. And again, I'm saying that she snuck out just for this example. Another way this is going to look at is that the moon and Saturn are going to have a coming together in a conversation that is an impact or is a direct reflection of the energy tied to Venus, because Venus is still separating. The moon made a trine to Venus as Venus was entering the square. Now Venus has made the conjunction to Saturn. Venus has come into, now the moon has made a conjunction to Saturn. Now the moon has come into the picture in a whole different way. And we're talking about something. Emotional depth, emotional weight. There's a timeliness to this conversation. For some of us, it's going to be that late night, like I said, with a bottle of wine, wrapping up the night, on the back patio type of energy. For others, it's going to be more like early the next morning, kind of waking up in your feels and feeling like we've missed something, feeling like something from the past is really starting to hit our gut. It's coming through our heart. It's coming through our chest. It's starting to come through. And that gets us into where we're kind of at on the 16th. So I'm bumping this again just by the hours. Now, the moon's conjunction to Saturn, 1:30 in the morning. The moon's square to Venus, roughly like 3:30 in the morning. But then whenever we get into the next part of the day, the next transit that happens is that the moon is going to make a trine to Mars. What, again, did we talk about with Cancer and Mars? There's a disruption here, but it is a necessary disruption. It is a needed disruption. There are things that we have thought about overnight, that we dreamt about overnight, that were a part of the energy that has now put a different level of weight to what's coming to the surface, because the moon, our emotions, is going to make a trine to Mars, which rules the head. Certain things that came to light this week, certain things that came together this week, certain conversations that were had, certain decisions that were had, certain advice that was given, coaching that was given, lessons that were taught this week are starting to make something come to the surface. And in the surface area with Mars in Cancer, there is disruption. And with Mars energy, it's either chaotic disruption or pivotal disruption. There is no in between. Chaotic disruption means we're saying something that's going to make somebody mad. Not everybody's going to like it. The other disruption, the pivotal disruption, is the necessary turning point energy in certain things. And this energy here feels like an emotional turning point before we get into the actions that need to follow in eclipse season. Why am I saying it that way? The moon is in a trine to Mars. The next two eclipses are going to be ruled by Mars. So whenever we get closer to eclipse season, I will have an eclipse video, and I'll start it with this part of the transit. This feels like emotional shifts, emotional disruptions that are going to lead to actionable differences through eclipse season. And that's kind of where we end next week, is being in our feels, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether we're like super happy that we did something, that we went somewhere, that we got to, go to that event. We're just riding the high. It was a great concert last night. I'm so glad we went. Or it's going to be that reminiscent energy of the past coming to the surface, those deep level emotions, those hard things that are starting to come up more and more, those weights that we've been feeling for weeks. Saturn has been in Pisces for a while. There hasn't been any true hard aspects to it since he went in there. The first true hard aspect is that Venus-Saturn square. But Saturn being in the superior position doesn't make this feel like a negative challenge. It makes it feel like it's a timely shift for where we're going next. And remember, Saturn rules time. And whenever we get into next week, we're going to be in eclipse season. So just be aware of that. Now, I'm really, really hoping this all transfers over correctly, and you're not just having to watch me talk this entire time and looking at a screen that y'all can't see. So if that is the case, I'm sorry. That's why I started this video letting everybody know what was going on, and I will be talking to the developers this next week. Again, I am very, very sorry. I'm going to hit stop share, and now you will just see my face. Hi. Okay, so Mercury's in shadow. Understand a lot of the topics and conversations, a lot of the mindset shifts of this week. Sorry, I can't talk now. As those start to go into effect, we are going to feel the slowdown. If it is a mental slowdown, parts of this week, if you don't have things lined out ahead of time, you will be frustrated by the mental slowdown. Just be aware of that. When other people don't have things lined out and they're having the mental slowdown, then you need to be patient. That's going to be hard for some people, but it's true. Be patient. That is just something that we have to work through. If you have the ability to be more social, to take the mental break, Friday and Saturday, to allow for something else to come through mentally, it will aid in the mental shift. And it will make the emotional shift of next Sunday, that starts next Sunday, a lot easier to overcome. Hit me up with questions. Hit me up with concerns. I love and appreciate every single one of you that watch my videos, that support me in all the ways that you guys do. I really do love and appreciate every single one of you. I do this for you guys. You have no idea. Like, I'm fine with sitting in my room and just looking at the transits by themselves, but that doesn't help anybody. So I truly do this for you guys. Message me with any questions. The next video will be, again, a breakdown of the Mercury retrograde that's coming up, that we're already in the shadow of. And aside from that, we're good to go. Enjoy the week, guys, and subscribe.